There is a particular kind of silence that has nothing to do with the absence of sound. It is the silence that falls when 30 trained warriors, beings who have spent their entire lives preparing for combat, are given a choice, and every single one of them looks away. That silence fell in Hall 7 of the Valdris Combat Institute on the 42nd day of the cycle, and the person who ended it was the last one anyone predicted. The Institute sat on the edge of the Korath Plateau, on the planet Sundar, a harsh world where the wind reminded you every morning that comfort was not a universal default. For 60 years, it had produced elite coalition combat officers across 14 systems. Its first cycle failure rate was 40%, designed deliberately to filter those who were capable from those who merely believed they were. General Vorrakh Thessan had run the Advanced Combat Division for 11 years. He was Rhavani, a heavy-gravity species standing nearly 2.5 meters tall. He moved with the calculated economy of someone for whom every motion carried a physical cost, and he possessed the quiet authority of a being who had never needed to raise his voice to be obeyed. He taught a single course: applied threat engagement. The catalog described it as a practical framework for real-world combat assessment. What it omitted was that the assessments were not simulations, the threats were not modeled, and the medical wing maintained an accelerated intake process specifically for his students. On this morning, 31 cadets filed into Hall 7. 28 of them fit the Institute's exact archetype: Rhavani heavy infantry, built like load-bearing architecture, Krelian tactical specialists with 4-point vision and near-instantaneous reaction times, and the Sulvari paired combatants, Ren and Vile, who moved as a single coordinated system, carrying the quiet confidence of top-ranked predators. And then there were the 3 humans. They sat in the 3rd row, center, not the back, where most vulnerable species position themselves for protection, but exactly where they could be seen. The Rhavani cadets had already completed their assessment, concluding within 90 seconds that the humans were small, soft-tissued, and lacked serious training. One of them, a young woman with dark hair pulled back simply, was reading a secondary datapad while the room filled. Ren, one half of the Sulvari pair, glanced at her briefly, then at Vielle. A single look conveyed their shared assessment: filed, not a factor. The human woman did not look up. Her name was Cara Voss. She was 27, Earthborn, and she was reading a xenobiology profile of 17 apex predators, cross-referenced with 40 years of combat records. She had found it in the public archive 3 weeks prior. She had a system: read once for primary comprehension, flag key data, then read again to find what she missed. It was not a fast system, but it was thorough. She had used it since she was 12, and thoroughness had never been the wrong choice. She turned a page. General Thessan entered at precisely 800. The room went so quiet the ventilation system became audible. He stood at the front, taking inventory. His eyes moved slowly across the rows, pausing briefly on the 3rd row. Cara looked up, met his gaze for a single second, and returned to her datapad. Something shifted in Thessan's expression, a fraction of a degree, then gone. "You are here because someone decided you had potential," Thessan said, his voice carrying effortlessly. "I do not yet share that belief. Today's session is not theoretical." He touched the wall panel. The partition behind him depolarized, revealing a reinforced containment area. In its center, behind a humming energy barrier, stood a Vorrakh. Several cadets went entirely still. Native to the hostile class jungles of Karath Prime, the creature was 3 meters long, 6-limbed, and covered in layered dermal plates designed to absorb massive impact force. 4 sensory clusters allowed it to track movement in all directions simultaneously. Its massive terminal strike appendages had been documented fracturing reinforced hull plating. It looked at the cadets with the patient, unhurried attention of an apex predator. The Rhavani cadets stopped moving. The Krelians shifted into threat assessment configuration. Ren and Vielle closed the distance between themselves by 3 centimeters. A Solvari tactical reflex, meaning exit vector calculation, had begun. Their certainty had encountered something it hadn't accounted for. I require one volunteer, Thessan said. The objective is engagement, control, and survival. No weapons, no support. Duration is open-ended. The class looked at the Vorrakh. The silence that followed was 30 beings arriving at the exact same calculation, and 30 of them arriving at the same answer. Thessan began to walk the rows, slowly. He passed the Rhavani. Nobody moved. He passed the Krelians. The stillness intensified. He passed the top-ranked Sulvari pair. Neither stirred, though their posture tightened. He reached the third row. Cara Voss set her datapad face down. She raised her hand. Not quickly, not as a performance, but with the quiet, administrative confirmation of a decision already settled. The texture of the silence broke. The Rhavani cadet stared at her, then at the creature, his lifelong certainty fracturing. Ren looked at Vael, a long look carrying a question they didn't have a category for. Thessan looked at Cara for 3 full seconds. Cadet Voss, you understand what you are volunteering for? Yes, General. Report to the containment area. The rest of you will observe. The barrier withdrew with a low pneumatic hiss. Cara walked into the containment area alone, her movements measured as she catalogued the dimensions of the space, the floor texture, and the Vorrakh's positioning. The Vorrakh's sensory clusters locked onto her. Cara knew its strike pattern, a committed forward charge followed by a sweeping motion of its terminal appendages. She also knew its sensory clusters processed movement in zones rather than continuously, creating a fractional delay when approached from a specific lateral angle. And she knew its dermal plates were thinnest at the junction points between its middle and rear limbs. The information had been sitting in the public archive, available to anyone who bothered to look. The Vorrakh charged. It covered the distance in under 2 seconds, a total mass strike that shook the observation floor. Cara moved laterally and forward, not away, absorbing a glancing blow that sent her sliding 8 feet across the floor into the padded wall. In the observation area, the Rhavani cadet stopped breathing. Ren's hand moved instinctively toward vials. Cara lay still for 1 second, then she got up. She didn't do it dramatically. She got up because it was the next item in the sequence. Cataloging the impact on her left side, she refocused on the Vorrakh as it spun to recalculate its approach. She began to move, changing her approach angles constantly, forcing the creature to repeatedly reset its tracking. She took 2 more heavy strikes over the next 3 minutes, the last driving her to 1 knee. Each time she filed the pain away and stood back up, committed to doing what the situation required for as long as it required it. Then she changed variables. She began producing low, irregular tones from the back of her throat, paired with a slight forward lean and an altered stride rhythm. To the untrained eye, it looked random. To General Thessan, who had studied Carath Prime predators, it was immediately recognizable as sensory disruption, an exploitation of the Vorrakh's zone-based processing by introducing signals outside its instinctual categories. The Vorrakh's charge speed dropped. It began to circle her instead, a behavioral anomaly that forced the Krelian specialists to completely recalibrate their metrics. Ren and Vael forgot exit vectors entirely. They simply watched, trying to comprehend what they were seeing. Cara moved with the circle, maintaining distance, keeping up the low acoustic interference. She was waiting for a single, specific configuration. The moment the Vorrakh lowered its forward mass into a stalled charge position, exposing the thin dermal junction on its left flank. The Vorrakh stalled. Cara executed 4 fast, precisely placed steps. She struck, not with wild, desperate force, but with the concentrated impact of a calculated plan. The junction point. Left side. The Vorrakh let out a sound without translation in any coalition language. Then, the 3-meter plated apex predator folded at its joints and crashed heavily onto the containment floor. Cara stood over it. She was bleeding from above her right eye, her training suit torn at the shoulder, her breathing strictly controlled. She looked at the fallen creature not with triumph, but with the quiet verification of a predicted outcome. In the observation area, absolute silence reigned. The Rhavani cadet stared at the floor, facing the complete reconstruction of his worldview. Ren and Vile sat with their hands still 3 centimeters apart, their ranking models utterly useless. Thessan descended to the containment floor, stopping in front of Cara. "The junction point," he noted. "Yes, General. That is not in the standard engagement curriculum." "No, sir. It was in the Open Access Archive, Section 4 of the Karath Prime Predator documentation." Thessan was quiet for a moment, letting the weight of that realization settle. "You read the archive?" "3 times," she said. Thessan looked at her for 3 more seconds, then turned to the observing cadets. He did not give a speech. He didn't need to. The raw data of what they had just witnessed spoke louder than any lecture on human biology ever could. "Report to medical, Cadet Voss," Thessan said quietly. "Class dismissed." Cara Voss returned to Hall 7 after the medical intake cleared her, sitting back down in the 3rd row center. She picked up her datapad, found her place in Section 7 of the document, which covered secondary predator classifications, and continued reading. Around her, the remaining cadets sat in a profoundly altered silence. It was the silence of 30 minds quietly, thoroughly revising their calculations against new, undeniable data. The Rhavani cadet in front of her did not look back. He was busy thinking about the junction point, the acoustic disruption, and the terrifying economy of her movements, slowly rebuilding his definition of what the word capable actually meant. In the 5th row, Ren and Vielle sat without speaking, an anomaly for the paired combatants. They would need days alone to find the words for what they had seen, adjusting a ranking system that had previously dictated the humans were not a factor. In the containment bay below, a medical team was already resetting the Vorrakh. The creature would recover. Cara noted this peripherally, flagged a paragraph regarding behavioral tells in subsurface predators, and began her second read of the page. The first reading told you what was there. The second told you what it meant. And across the galaxy, the Coalition was finally learning what it meant when Earth-born assets entered the field. Cara Voss turned the page and kept reading.